Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions every Monday from 9 to 10 o'clock. We talk about things that affect you and your homeowners association or condominium association, some of the issues that you may have to deal with, some of the questions you may have. Some of you are new to this area, new to homeowners associations. Maybe you've lived out of state. You're not used to the condos or HOAs that we have here in Florida, which are a little bit more restrictive in terms of legislation and things like that. So all the time there's issues that come up and questions, and we find that the most common question is, can they really do that? But anyway, we're here to answer that question. Can they really do that? And we've been doing that for about 16 years to help you out. It is a community service program, so we welcome your calls at 220-9788. That's 772 area code, 220-9788. And you can also catch us on the internet, www.wstu1450.com. That's WSTU1450.com. And that is where you can follow us when you go back up north. You got questions about your association's policies. You get some stuff in the mail. You can follow us, and maybe we'd be happy to answer the questions. But we do always advise you that we don't have your documents. So the answer we give you is not going to be specific to your association because your documents could change that. So we give you an answer that's based on what you have interpreted your documents to say or what you give us as information. And we try to do the best we can based on what we understand of what you're saying about your documents and about the law, the regulations and rules, and common practice. And many times we'll talk a little bit broader than your problem to deal with those common practice issues because they may be just a little bit different in another association, and we want to make sure that other association's question is answered as well. That's also the reason that we don't ask you for your association's name, because there's others out there that may have a similar problem, but if they don't hear their association's name, they may think that it doesn't apply to them, and so they don't listen as closely, or they don't call in because they think it's not the same. So don't give us your association. We don't need that. You can give us a name to call you rather than hey you, but we can call you that too if you like. But we welcome the call. Again, 220-9788, 220-WSTU. My name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a local CPA and a community association manager. And the person that adds all of the credibility, I add all of the concern. But the guy that adds all the credibility to the show is our attorney, Peter Mullengarden. Peter's been helping us answer these questions, and you answer these questions for 16 years here since the beginning. And he has been a tremendous resource to not only this show, but all of the people who have joined this show and called in over the years. So, Peter, thanks for joining us. And as usual, we appreciate you being here.
Good morning. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. So all things considered, we got, tomorrow is tax day. Some people think that Sunday was tax day. It was not. It became Monday, but because, thank goodness, Washington, D.C. is closed on the day following tax day for some reason. That means that tax day is actually the day after the day after. So it's going to be yeah, right. That's the way it is that's the way. Nothing is clear with the IRS. It is due. Here's when it's due, unless it's not due until it's due after this day that it's not going to be.
So why didn't it do yesterday? I mean today. Excuse me.
Because what the IRS is actually in Washington D.C. is actually closed because the District of Columbia celebrates a holiday today, and as a result, D.C. is closed. Now, the interesting thing about that is, I think, as taxpayers, this is my solution to our.
I used to live up there, but I don't remember it being closed.
Yeah, no, it's kind of been the last few years. I don't know what the deal is, but and I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. I think it might be Emancipation Day or something like that. I'm not exactly sure what the. Mike will look it up for us, but
it's a holiday. Whatever.
Yeah, it's a holiday. Okay. So here's my solution. I don't like paying taxes at all, and I don't like my clients to pay taxes. So I'm thinking that a bunch of us go up to Washington, D.C., take over the town. We make it a holiday every single day in Washington. The IRS will never be open, and bingo, there will no longer be any taxes due. you'll have them, but they'll never be. You'll never have to pay them. I think that's pretty cool. I think we should do.
Where's
that.
your civic duty of paying your taxes? Oh, come on.
Yeah. Checks in the mail. It's the same place that my civic duty is when they're trying to penalize me for stuff that I don't owe and didn't do, but that they can do because they have power. But anyway, that's another
Okay.
show. That's another show.
Okay.
But anyway.
You were right. It is Emancipation Day, by the way.
Oh, okay. Woo!
Well,
Another right.
well.
We're recording this show. This is two in 16 years. Two of them where somebody said I was right. We're keeping this thing. We're recording this. It's not as valuable as the one where because Mike he's crazy. But
Now, when does the state of Florida observe Emancipation?
I don't know. We never do. Probably we probably never did.
May 20th.
May 20th, huh?
It's April 16th in D.C. because this
okay.
is the day that Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
That's
well,
pretty
it's a worthy holiday.
Yeah. So that works out pretty good. How come? I wonder how come it's only been the last few years. I don't remember this being the case prior to maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
According to Wikipedia, so grain of salt.
Right.
January 4th, 2005 is when legislation was signed making it an official public holiday in D.C.
Okay.
Okay. So thankful for that. We do.
That was
appreciate
several
it.
years after I left the area. So.
Yeah, that's right. So I thought it was relatively recent. I guess I'm getting old because 2005 is not that recent. But
Although it was held yearly from 1866 to 1901.
wow, I missed all of that. We see all the information you get on this show. Wow, I'm telling you, that is amazing information. So
You're a cornucopia of knowledge.
yeah, that's true. That's true. But anyway, just as a final side note, I was watching. There was they've been running I think it's called Lies and Legends or something like that on Fox at night on it's a Civil War thing. They've been running it's a historical type thing on the Civil War and all of that. And it was interesting because last night was the episode where Lincoln was signing the Emancipation Proclamation. And it was kind of cool because some people thought, at least according to what they were talking about last night, some people thought that he actually was hesitating because it took him a while to sign it. Some of the people who were there, it took him a while to sign it. And some of the people thought he was actually hesitating. But in reality, he had been out all day long shaking hands at some sort of a function. And his hand kept cramping up. And he had to wait because he couldn't sign because his hand was cramping, and then finally he signed it out. But it was interesting. It was a little interesting snippet of information back in the Emancipation Proclamation days. But anyway, so that's what we've got. So that's the show for today. We'll no that's all the most information we give. We are a community service program.
Welcome to the History
Channel. That's absolutely true. Speaking of information, Peter, did you want to talk about any? I'll let you talk about whatever you want today. But did you want to talk about any of the law changes yet, or you want to hold off on that?
We can talk about some of them.
Okay.
I mean, it only depends. I think we talked about a few of the law changes already. As most people know, there is a website requirement. If you have more than 150 or 150 or more units, condominium units, you have to have a website for your governing documents and your meeting notices and contracts and other things. Now, that originally was supposed to be up and running by July 1st, 2018. That's been extended to January 1st, 2019.
Oh, okay.
There's an additional 6 months to get the website up and going. That was last year's change. This year they pushed that out. Okay?
Now, I wonder what they'll do, Peter, after people hack these websites and get all this personal information. What do you think the next step that they'll do?
Well, you're not supposed to put anything on the website.
Yeah, right.
That's inaccessible to personal information of owners and things like that.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Not supposed to anyway.
It's funny because nowadays, just having access to somebody's email address is a tremendous opportunity for spam. And, this is something that's probably appropriate for the show. And I'll just mention this, is that, we've got this requirement now it's going to have to be implemented. And some associations will be behind the eight ball, and they won't realize it was law, and then so they'll try to get it done right away. And this right now, there are a number of criminals that are salivating over this law. Trust me, there are guys out there that are just waiting for this to go into effect. You will get hacked. Every association is going to be under attack. So if they don't have the kind of controls, you need to spend some money to prevent this, because let's face it, the biggest attacks financially in Florida are financial attacks, trying to get access to people's accounts or getting them to send money to elderly people who A, are not that good with the internet to start with, and B, don't understand that they're being scammed because it all looks legitimate. And they don't know always how to test out to determine if it's not legitimate. And many of these websites will not have the controls in place to prevent some of this kind of stuff from happening. So even though there won't be any personal information on that website, I guarantee you out there, those of you that are in a 150 unit association or more, when you get an email from your association asking for some additional financial information for the files, like your current address, your driver's license number, so they can verify that you're legitimate, and the last four digits of your social security number, the next thing you know, you will be sending money to some prince in Libya or something. So, I'm just saying that's going to be a huge problem. And all kidding aside, people are preying on those people who are not that good on the internet, or even that are. And I'll tell you an example of one that I got yesterday or 3 days ago, Peter. And it was it was potentially legitimate. It was a friend of mine works in the banking industry, and so I have contact with her on a pretty much regular basis. And in fact, I was right in the middle of doing something with her anyway, and her phone got hacked. So it got emails off of her phone, her personal email off of her phone. And actually, all it did was get her address book coming from her phone, and it was actually an email address that I think she used to use in a long time ago. But anyway, I get this email indicating that she was in a meeting or on a conference call, which would be true, and she's very involved in some organizations I'm involved in that are charitable organizations, and she asked me if I could do her a favor and run down and get some basically gift card, iTunes gift card type things, right? And she said, it said just run down, get them 5 $100 cards, scratch them off, take a picture of them, send them to me, so I've got them. So, I could have thought, well, she's involved in some charitable thing. She needs these things for this raffle or something, and could I run down and get them? Now, the grammar was horrible. The tenses didn't make sense. So right away I knew it was written by somebody who doesn't speak English. So so it's probably Russian or Chinese or something. But the bottom line is, a lot of people could fall for that because, in fact, I had sent her back because I didn't look at where she comes up as a name on my phone, not an email address. So I didn't know it was an old email address. It came up under her name, and so I had even responded back to her on a banking transaction I was involved in. And fortunately, I didn't provide any information. But that's the kind of stuff that's now going to become very, very prevalent in the condo world. Banks get targeted. CPA firms get targeted. Attorneys, to some degree, get targeted because we have access to private information. And when homeowners associations, which have access to your personal files, those things are, they're going to be open for attack. Even something as simple as your password, because a lot of people use different passwords for all of their home stuff, their personal stuff, their personal banking and other things. They use the same password. And then they use something different maybe if they've got a business account or whatever else. They may use something different on their credit cards. But for a lot of their personal stuff, that may be their same password. Trust me, these guys that do this for a living, they know that, and they're going to be searching for this kind of thing, and it's just going to be ripe. I'm just really disappointed in the state for mandating this. It's like the IRS when they required us all to file electronically, and then didn't think through the amount of fraud that was going to occur. And we've got billions of dollars worth of fraud in the Treasury Department, in the IRS, because of forcing us to file before they were ready to secure our data. Of course, they blamed it on us, but it's not. It's their fault. So I'm a little bit upset about this, to tell you the truth, Peter. I'm not. This is one of the things that's come down recently that I think is a disaster. But anyway, we'll see what happens.
Well, I thought it was somewhat unnecessary. I see part of the reasoning. They want to make it easier for people to, just click on the website and see the meeting notice and, whatever. But I'm not sure they had to mandate the websites.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the website requirement's been pushed out. Now there was, I won't say controversy, that's too strong of a word, but the year before they had amended the Condominium Act regarding term limits.
Right.
And somewhat inexplicably said you could not serve more than 4 consecutive 2-year terms. Okay, but was silent about the 1-year terms. So that's been changed. I think we talked about this before, but that's been changed effective this year in July to say that that a board member may not serve more than 8 consecutive years.
Okay.
All right. So rather than 4 2-year terms, now it's 8 consecutive years, which obviously would encompass whether you're serving a 1-year term or a 2-year term.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of 2-year terms, the law previously was that board members may serve 2-year terms if permitted by the bylaws, meaning that you couldn't serve 3-year terms, right?
Right.
Because you used to have boards which staggered 3-year terms. Well, now it says that board members may serve terms longer than 1 year if permitted by the bylaws or the Articles of Incorporation. So now it's, if you want to go back to the 3-year staggered terms, does that mean I think you mentioned this point a few weeks ago. Does that mean that those documents that had 3-year terms but were never changed are now reinvigorated and now effective again?
Yeah.
Because they weren't effective before. Hard to say. Now, if the term limit, the 8 consecutive years being the limit, is not applicable if there's not enough eligible candidates to fill the vacancies, okay, on the board at the time of the vacancy, or if, and this is somewhat odd language, or unless approved by an affirmative vote of owners representing 2/3 of all the votes cast in the election. So does that mean that if you run and you get 2/3 at least of the votes that are being cast, then you're not termed out? It seems to say that.
Yeah.
So that's the
yeah, and
that's the language there.
Yeah, and that's that. Again, a lot of this stuff was tinkering with things that where they're trying to fix stuff that probably didn't need to be fixed. But in the first place, like those staggered 3-year terms, those worked pretty well because that way you could have 1/3 of your board going off at a time, and to try to, when you got 3-year terms, you can stagger those things so you got people rolling in and rolling off. We talked about the whole concept of institutional memory, the fact that you get people that are brand new to the board, and everybody's brand new to the board, and there's no history of what's happened in the past. Mm. But
I mean, even the language, not enough eligible candidates to fill the vacancies, that probably should have said, or if you have the same or fewer number of candidates. Because if you have enough but not more, does that mean that? What does that mean? I mean, if you have 5 running for 5, what does that mean? That's enough. It's, anyway, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's sort of oddly worded.
And
and
you know what's going on with that too, Peter, is kind of weird, is that, and I mentioned I was monitoring an election. Not monitoring, I was counting. I was counting votes. But
Oh, yeah, that's right. You were a counter. I forgot.
yes, I was a counter. But and actually, it worked out pretty well, I think. But it was interesting because in that situation, not only was it important because there were 9 candidates running for 5 positions, but not only was it important who got that 5th position, because I found out later the first vote had been a tie, and then when it was recounted, it was determined to be one way, and then it was recounted again, and it was determined to be another way, and we recounted, and it was we recounted, and that 5th slot was 1 vote was all it was different. It was one vote, and it was the opposite way of what the original vote was, but or the second vote. But anyway, but the interesting thing about that is that it made a difference what order you were, who got the most votes, the second most, and the third vote most, because in this case, it determined whether they had a 1-year or a 2-year
It affected
term.
the term, right?
Yeah. So, so there was some, that's why I couldn't understand why we were counting the whole thing if it was just a couple people that were in question, but that was why. There was some of the other votes changed as well, so they wanted to get the whole thing done because it affected, in the other case, I think the 3rd and 4th affected who was going to be, who was potentially going to get a 2-year versus a 1-year. So anyway, it was an interesting process, but yeah, these votes like this and the consecutive terms and the language in some of this is really kind of difficult, and sometimes, I mean, I'm not so sure it's necessary. Like that last thing you were talking about, Peter. So let's say that I'm termed out, but I think I can get enough proxies to
wouldn't be proxy.
Oh, yeah, this is condo. This is. But you know what?
Condo law.
You know what? There's a lot of HOAs that just are gonna follow some of this stuff. But anyway.
Well, this doesn't apply. This term limit doesn't apply.
No, I know, no. But they're what I'm saying is they're gonna some of these things, they just fall in place and start putting these things in their bylaws and all that kind of stuff. But let's say that let's say it's an association and I think I could get enough votes to get that 2/3 level. So do I demand that I be put on the ballot? I mean, can I do that? Can I demand that I be put on the ballot, even though I'm not technically eligible, unless I get the required number of votes?
I don't know. It looks like that to me.
I mean, that's what I would say.
This is what it says. It says, I'll just read it to you. It says, a board member may not serve more than 8 consecutive years unless approved by an affirmative vote of unit owners representing 2/3 of all votes cast in the election. Well, obviously the votes cast in the election is what's making the determination.
Right.
So it would seem to me that you would be eligible to be on the ballot. It doesn't say you're ineligible to be on the ballot. It just says you can't serve.
Right.
It doesn't say you can't be on the ballot.
Right.
And they've made that distinction before in reading the law, where it says, well, the law doesn't say you're not on the ballot. It just says you can't serve. So it would seem to me you could run, and if you got 2/3 or more of all the votes cast in the election, you would not be termed out. If you didn't, it would seem like, okay, you're not eligible. I mean, you're not eligible to serve. You were eligible to run, which sounds crazy, but that's how you read this. But you wouldn't be able to be elected.
So here's what.
That's how I read it right now.
So think how messed up this is going to be. So first of all, and
by the way, they also have taken. I'm sorry to interrupt, but they also have taken a position that, at least verbally, who knows what it's going to be at the end of the day, that the 8 years commences with terms starting after the effective date of the law. So if you served 20 years in a row up until now, that doesn't count towards the 8, supposedly. But we'll see how that goes. Anyway, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's going to be interesting because, well, first of all, you've got this scenario that you're talking about when that term limit thing starts. Technically, I'm 8 years down the road anyway, but and now you could reinstate 3-year terms, so you could have the 3-year terms that are in play. So now,
what if you're in the middle of a third year term?
Or what if you're running? What if this time you're being elected to a 3-year term, and you got consecutive 3-year terms. So you'll have 3 years, 6 years. The next election, your term would actually go beyond.
That's what I mean. It would go beyond.
Yeah, so you'd go. So now you got a half year.
Can
You
you
got a
not-
special election.
I don't know.
Or you
Good
can't
question.
run. All of this. I just love it. And then, so let's say I am eligible, but let's say I got to have the 2/3 to. I'm not eligible, but I got to have the 2/3, and I figure, okay, I've been the president for the last and on the board for the last 25 years, so I'll get enough votes, but it's 2/3, right? So, so I might not. I mean, is it 2/3 of a quorum?
No,
it's
it says
2/3 of the
No, it
units.
says 2/3 of the owners, 2/3 of all the votes cast.
All of the votes cast.
Not. It used to be. Prior to the first variation of this, which was 2 years ago, when they first came up with the term limit, was 2/3 of all the votes in the association.
Right.
Okay. Now it's been cut back to 2/3 of the votes cast. Now remember, to have a valid election, you only need 20% of
That's what I
the
was
people
gonna say.
voting.
So I got a 200 unit association. I got 40 people that it takes for a quorum, and I got to get 30 of those, basically, a little less than 30 of those.
Well, it depends how many people vote, but
Well, that's what I'm saying. As long as technically, that's all it would take for me to get in an apathetic association. That's all it would take.
at a bare minimum association, yeah.
Yeah, and that's 200 units. But they'd
Look,
have
I'm
a
not-
website to make sure they told everybody.
Like, this is obviously going to raise issues that, one excellent issue is, what if you do invoke or amend your documents that have 3-year terms, right? And what do you do about someone who serves, like you said, 2 in a row, and then they're reelected for the third? But that means they're going to be into nine years, and you can't serve 9 years.
Yeah.
So.
And here's another thing that's interesting, Peter, is what happens if I'm running for and I need that 2/3, and I pull 60%. So I don't get the 2/3. I pull 60%, but so I'm not elected. But I pulled 60% of the votes. Now think about it. Depending upon how many candidates there are, and how it's because you don't have to vote typically on these things. You don't have to vote for everybody.
Nope.
You can vote for one or how many ever. So it's possible that by doing that, I could pull enough votes out that somebody who maybe got, a dozen votes could be on the board. Nobody really intended for them to be on the board, because
Right. He was a distant second or third or fourth place or whatever.
Yeah. And so they by default get on because there's nobody there, and it's kind of interesting. I mean, it really is, and that's going to be tough for people in the association because they may have somebody that they want to be on the board, but then you got this issue. Well, let's say there's 6 people running for 5 seats, and one of the people running is one of these ones that's going to take the supermajority. And let's say one of the people that's running, now this hardly ever happens, but let's say one of the people that's running is somebody that you absolutely do not want to be on the board. Yeah, that never happens. So all of a sudden, if you got to make a decision. I've got to vote. How am I going to vote for this thing? Is this guy going to be elected? Should somebody else run because we don't want this other person to automatically get on the board if we don't get 2/3 of the vote? Now there's all kinds of political. I'm going to start a consulting firm that's going to do political advisory work for condo associations on how to run an election. How to run for office in a condo association, strategically taking over the board. But anyway, it's just funny. It's interesting that I don't even know why the government has to get involved in this stuff. You know what I mean?
I have to admit that I'm not a fan of term limits.
Yeah.
To me,
as it relates to HOAs, definitely, and condos, definitely. I don't understand why. If people want to do that,
that's what I mean.
it's
I'm not
the
a fan of term limits
Yeah.
in the HOA condo context. Just let the owners elect who they want to elect.
Yeah.
But anyway, That's just me.
And trust me, as bad as that person is that you don't like that's on the board, there is somebody who could be infinitely worse sitting out there someplace that you don't want on your board. Trust me, I've seen enough of those. So it's not a good thing.
So anyway,
Yeah.
that's a little bit on the term limit situation. I'm going to bounce around here a little bit because
Sure.
the next one's kind of interesting. I don't know how much it comes up. I've had clients ask me this, but now it's been, I guess, codified. Basically, again, this is condominiums now, not for homeowner associations. The state, also in its wisdom, believes that electric cars are a good thing. Okay, so an association now has to allow an owner to put in a charging station. There are some hoops that you have to jump through. The station would have to go into the charging station. You cannot prohibit an owner basically from putting one of these things in within the boundaries of their limited common element parking spot or parking area. The station cannot cause irreparable damage to the property. The electric power must be separately metered and paid by that owner. He's responsible for the cost of the installation and the operation, maintenance, and repair, including insurance. You can enforce the payment of that through a lien against the owner's unit. If the owner or the successor of that unit decides that he doesn't want this charging station anymore, they're responsible for the cost of removal of the charging station. Again, you can enforce payment for that as well through liening. You can require, again, this is just going on real quickly, the owner has to comply with safety standards, building codes, things like that, architectural standards that are reasonable, imposed by the association. It has to be installed by a licensed contractor. You need a certificate of insurance, blah, blah, blah. You have to reimburse the association for the actual cost of any increase in insurance that the association may have to pay because the charging station's there. The association basically has to give the owner an implied easement across the common elements to the owner for the purpose of the installation of the charging station and the furnishing of power. So
Now, Peter, on that, let
so
me
it's
ask,
just going through it relatively quickly, but that's new.
let me ask you this then. So you said limited common element is if you don't have assigned parking and your parking lot is just open for any unit owner to park in, can you still have this?
No.
No. So it only applies if you have a parking garage or assigned parking space.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I wonder if those
There's a limited common element. Some parking spaces are actually units for occasionally, but
yeah, right.
I'm assuming it doesn't say that, though. Usually they are. But it would not apply to just an assigned spot. And there is a difference between merely having a spot assigned or a spot that's pertinent as a limited common element. The board typically, not always, but typically has the authority to assign general common element spaces to owners. Now, those assignments can be revoked by the board at any time. A limited common element is something in the declaration is named or designated as a limited common element to a certain unit. So it has to be that level, not just an assigned spot where the board can assign, unassign, reassign, revoke the assignment, but an actual limited common element that the declaration condominium designates to the unit.
Now, for this is geared towards those associations out on Hutchinson Island. Remember how much money you made off of cell tower easements?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's time to start thinking a little bit about recharging station leases, and because I know there's some companies like Tesla and others who may be willing to pay some decent money to install a place on your common property, and it could be an opportunity for some additional revenue out there on the island, because there may be some on the mainland, but by the time you get out there and having to get charged, and this way you can charge your car there and walk up someplace down the street, go get something to eat. So just kind of mention that might be an opportunity if you're an association to make a call to a couple of these places and see if they might not be willing to pay you a few $1,000s a year have a charging station on your property. So
Maybe.
yep, it's going to come up.
Doesn't say you can't have a deal with
That's right. So
with one of these companies.
and even if I have a limited common space and wanted it, I might work the same kind of deal, but depending upon what the situation is, I might work out something that I can get that covered, so that the association can, maybe even an assignment of my limited common interest, with the use of it at least. So
I'm not sure. Well,
grant an easement on my limited common use. I probably could do that.
probably not. I'm not sure you're going to get away with that. But if someone wants to pay you to, well, it's funny. Although it says you have to put in one of these charging stations,
Right.
okay, doesn't actually have to have an electric vehicle.
That's what I'm thinking. See that?
I know. You can just start renting out your space to other owners.
That's
in
right.
town.
That's what I'm saying. And be the first, and you could start renting that baby out. And
But
make a
that's
little
probably
extra
not-
money.
That's probably not going to fly either.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we have that. We'll see. I imagine that we'll get some, interest with
Sure.
this charging station amendment. Another amendment that's not earth-shattering, but is something worthwhile to note, is the composition of the finding committee. The finding committee, the composition of the finding committee was different for condominium associations and for HOAs. Now they've been brought together, although for a change, the Condominium Act was amended to follow the HOA Act. Usually it's the other way around. But formerly, the Condominium Finding Committee was basically comprised of it could not be a board member or anyone residing in a board member's household.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now it's at least 3 members appointed by the board who are not officers, directors, or employees, or the spouse, parent, child, brother, or sister of an officer, director, or employee, which parallels the HOA law. So, not earth-shattering, but just something to
Okay, now, give me that one more
keep in
time.
mind.
Who is it? It's what?
It has to be at least 3 members appointed by the board who are not officers, directors, or employees of the association, or the spouse, parent, child, brother, or sister of an officer, director, or employee.
And they have to be members, correct?
Well, it says before a committee of at least 3 members, and that means 3 members of the association, or at least
that's what I'm wondering.
three members on that committee.
Yeah, see, I'm wondering. Yeah, because because many times you could have somebody that's on that committee that's not a that's not a member of the association. You might want to be a member of the committee.
Exactly, because the word member is not defined by the Condominium Act.
Right.
Okay. So I'm not necessarily. It doesn't say 3 unit owners. Okay.
Right.
It says 3 members. So I don't think it does have to be necessarily 3 owners.
Right.
Just the committee has to have 3 people on it.
So that's interesting, because then you could be using somebody who is not necessarily in the association. They could be they could just be. Now they still can't be a relative, linear, basically relationship to a board member or an officer. Although you know what, it didn't mention property manager, did it?
No.
Yeah. So conceivably, you could have a person from the property management company be on that board, which is interesting. So
On the finding committee, yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it.
I wouldn't do it either. But
Well, it says no employee. Okay. So I would not use a property manager. I would not use a property manager, only because I think that would be deemed employee or two, especially if it was employee. But you can say, well, it's not an employee if it's the manager who's employed by your property management company, right?
Right.
But to me, that's way too close to being a personnel or employee.
And I'll tell you what.
I would not use a property manager.
And I'll tell you what. I mean, and somebody will drive a truck through this hole, but the I know a large property management company that they will take a person from an association who ultimately is going to be a board member or something, and then they employ him in another association through their property management company, and tie them in through an employment relationship, not on that property, on another property, but. So it's kind of interesting that there's some of that game playing that takes place anyway. So we'll see what happens. This I think in the long run, this is probably a better thing, because I think the HOA Act was a little bit better the way it was structured. It was a little bit. It was a little bit. It had come. I think it came in later, didn't it? I mean, it was basically after it was one of the. It was
the HOA law?
Yeah, it came in after the condo law originally went into place on fines and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And enforcing fines. So.
Oh, yeah, much later.
Yeah, and so it was purposely, set up to be a little bit more flexible, but I think it actually had more teeth, though. The condo law still didn't have as much teeth as the.
Well, the condo law there's still a discrepancy, which I'll never really understand, but that's okay. Where in the condominium law, you still cannot lien for a fine.
Right. That's what I'm getting at.
But in an HOA, you can, although it has some odd language there too. You can lien for a fine, but not for a fine that's less than $1,000.
Right. So,
can't lien for a small fine.
Yes. So that is going to encourage people to run the fines up, right? So.
Why not?
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say why not, but
yes,
there would seem to be an incentive there.
Yeah.
So that was just somewhat of a strange change.
Yeah, so those are pretty. So those are some interesting ones. Those are probably some of the bigger ones right there. What else we got? Anything specific that you wanted to talk about this week on that? Any of the other items that came up?
Well, I only have a few minutes left. Those are. They finally did, which was a good thing, change the HOA law to catch up with the condo law. We had a problem a few years ago with the accord and satisfaction language. What does that mean? Where there was language in both the HOA and condominium law that said that when someone pays an assessment, that any restrictive endorsement was not supposed to be effective. Then there was a case that came down a few years ago where someone made a payment. They were going back that before they made this payment, they were going back and forth with the association about disputing it. Long story short, the lawyer sent the payment. The lawyer for the owner sent a payment, had a letter saying, this is, full and final payment, whatever. The association took it and said, well, that restrictive endorsement's no good, as most of us probably would have. Long story short, the court in that case said that the law of accord and satisfaction came into play, and now you could not, and basically that was deemed to be final payment. Pretty terrible case, actually.
Wow, yeah, that is.
Because it kind of flipped everything on its head that what we all had thought. Okay, so the Condominium Act had been amended 2 years ago, 3 years ago, to be very express, saying that any purported accord and satisfaction or any restrictive endorsement, was not going to be effective. But the HOA law didn't have it, so there was a split. Was there still a problem accepting the partial payments in an HOA with an accord and satisfaction, with some type of full payment notation on the check or a letter accompanying the check saying this is full and final payment? Was it a problem? Because we had always thought that those type of restrictive endorsements in the HOA context were not effective. But then we had this case, and then we had a split on that. Long story short, now they've amended the HOA law to at least be consistent with the condo law, saying that you apply the money per the statute, notwithstanding any purported restrictive endorsement, accord and satisfaction, blah blah blah. So that's a good thing. So now you can accept those partial payments without having to worry about waiving your ability to get the rest of the money.
Right. It's interesting that that was a problem in the lien law area in Florida for a while. It used to be that when you got a final release of lien, that you had a separate piece of paper that you had to have signed so that you could get a release of lien, a final release of lien, and so sometimes the subcontractors would be jerking you around on that stuff, and there would be a dispute, and so they'd be holding up the release of lien, so you couldn't, as a contractor, you couldn't get your draw to get paid, because some subcontractor was holding up something on the project, and then what happened was, and of course for a subcontractor that's a big deal, because if you give a final release of lien, you have no right to lien the property at that point, and that's your only collateral. So it was a big deal, and so what some of the contractors started doing is having a stamp made that when they deposited, when it was pushed through, there was a stamp on the back that basically said, or language on the back of the check that said that this is the final release and final payment, and that you're releasing your rights to lien, and by endorsing the check and depositing it, you were giving up your right to lien, and the reason the contractors, it was mostly the big companies, came up with this originally, is that they knew that the subcontractors, a lot of times that was going through the accounting department. The accounting department didn't understand the legal aspects of it, so they were just saying, "Hey, I got money, I'm putting it in my bank account," and so some clerk was stamping it with the deposit stamp and putting it in a deposit and sending it in, and lo and behold, they had taken, waived their lien rights. So I don't know for sure. I think that the state stepped in and said that was not a valid release of lien. You have to have somebody physically sign off. You can't just. This was just an endorsement stamp, and it said by depositing this money, you agree that you've released any rights to further claims or liens against the property and so forth. And it was just two sentences, and people that weren't even reading it. They were just stamping the stuff. So it is good on these kind of things, because people don't realize that there are legal ramifications with a lot of this type of stuff, and so like Peter's talking about here with payments, you may be giving up your rights to fine. You may be giving up or collecting interest. You may be giving up your rights to the penalty that was charged, or costs. You may be giving up your right to certain costs that you have a right to recover because you've spent a lot of money trying to collect the money. So it's kind of it's some of these things are really, they're mundane, but they're very important to the associations, because you can really give up a lot of rights. So this one was one that I think they got right. It was nice that they corrected that problem that had existed,
No, it was a big problem.
Yeah.
Because, it really left HOAs anyway in a kind of a quandary what to do with these partial payments that had restrictive endorsements on them, with the case hanging out there. But now, effective, I guess in July, it'll be clarified for both HOAs and for condos.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah. So, well, that's those are that's a good summary of some of the laws we're looking at. All of these things basically are July 1st, right? Except the website stuff, which is January 1. So we've got a little bit of time on that one, but otherwise, we'll be looking at it. Peter, next week, if you've got some other items we want to cover, we can cover that. But
there's more.
Yeah, there's a few more items, and we'll keep you in touch, and then of course there'll be. We'll keep you informed as we're going forward on some of the new things that are coming through too, because there's always going to be stuff on the horizon. There's always things happening. I would mention that it was we're running out of time, but I would mention that we did have that count, and I'll just say this about elections: the more transparency, the better. When people feel like they have an opportunity to catch a mistake, to, to see what's going on. Even if you don't agree with the results, you probably feel a little bit more comfortable that the results are what they are. So I would just encourage on all of these things, when you're dealing with your neighbors, this is the place you live. Consider the issues of transparency. It's not a good thing to do a lot of this stuff in a vacuum. So anyway, thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions. Peter, thanks for always being here with us. We appreciate it. And join us next week right here on WSTU Digital 1450, Martin County's Heritage Station.